Stop caring if they agree with your ideas. Hey gang, thank you so much for watching Speaker Breakdown. This video ended up going almost an hour, so we decided to break it up into two parts to make it a little bit easier for you to watch. This is part one, and you should be seeing a link somewhere at the end of the video for part two, or we'll link it down below in the description. Enjoy. Speaker Breakdown. This is one of the best speeches I've ever seen. There, I said it. It's a near perfect speech because it sort of had it all. It was serious, but had a lot of humor. It had a lot of facts, but it had a lot of emotion. It showed you lots of graphs, but there was also lots of stories. It was an emotional roller coaster.
Roller coaster ride.
It's something that made you feel and made you think. And it is a speech entitled How the US is Destroying Young People's Future by Professor Scott Galloway. And if you don't know who Professor Scott Galloway is, he's a very influential thought leader in the world of marketing and business. He teaches at Stern School of Business at New York University. He's famous for his books, he's speaking, he's a great interviewer, and he's known for, having no holds barred, telling things how they are, being very honest, not just with the world, but also about himself. And in this TED Talk, and let's be honest, TED Talks have really gone downhill. I mean, if I have to read another person who's a TEDx speaker on a subject that has nothing to do with anything, no offense, Ted, but honestly, just all you have to do is look at some of the TED Talks that have come out during and since COVID, and you realize they've gotten very boring.
Boring!
They've gotten very formulaic, and that's the way things work. You have a model, it works, people do it too much, now you need to do something new. And maybe the new thing is the way Professor Scott Galloway presents. Certainly, a lot of his presentations are based on his skill and his personality, but he does a lot of things that we can use to make very serious factual information both thought-provoking, fun, and emotional. But what are those things, dear viewer? Well, let's start watching and find out.
My name is Scott Galloway. I teach at NYU, and I appreciate your time. I have 44 slides in 720 seconds. Let's light this candle.
Now, right here, you have to understand that Professor Scott Galloway is known for being very, deadpan. He does something right here, though, that's very interesting in that he puts this opening, my name is Professor Scott Galloway. He actually does the exact same thing at the end.
My name is Scott Galloway. I teach at NYU, and I appreciate your time.
So you see what he did? He actually put a button on his presentation by saying the exact same thing at the beginning and at the end.
I've had 4 TV series in the last 3 years. 2 of them have been canceled before they were launched, and 2 were canceled within 6 weeks. Let's recap.
One of the interesting things about this is rather than giving a bio of I teach here, I teach this, he actually just gives you a couple of interesting examples that signify something about him that makes you more curious about him. And this is something that we can all do. Instead of just reading someone's generic bio, find out 1 or 2 super interesting things, either from the bio or by talking to them, and just mention that, because nobody cares or listens to bios. So let's watch and see what Professor Scott Galloway does. I'm just going to say Scott or Professor Galloway from now on.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm actually a global television star.
See there? For those of you who don't know me, I'm a global television star. Most people say, my name is Professor Scott Galloway, and I teach at the Stern School of Business in New York City. I have been a professor of marketing, blah, 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 blah. But look what he did.
True story. I've had 4 TV series in the last 3 years. 2 of them have been canceled before they were launched, and 2 were canceled within 6 weeks. Let's recap.
If we want to juice this thing,
Now notice something. I'm sure, listen, we don't all have this, I've been on TV a bunch of times, but we all definitely have some interesting things we've done, and we should make those the foundation of our bios and introductions.
we want to put a cattle prod up the ass of the economy.
Bloomberg, the most trusted name in financial news. Not for long.
I'm going to do whatever I can for this country of ours.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Jeez, come on, dude. You're 0 for 2. Are you
Face for podcasting. So first insight of the day, I'd like to be the first person to welcome you to the last TED. Okay. By the way, it's clear, what's it called? What are we here for? The brave and the brilliant. It's clear that Chris is a frustrated soap opera producer. Essentially,
and what he's doing here is essentially he's making fun of the event that he's in. This doesn't actually relate too much to his speech topic. However, I think he's doing this to wake the crowd up. He's doing this to add a whole bunch of humor right at the beginning. This does not relate to what he's talking about, but it relates to the event. So what he's doing is he's creating an inside joke. Now, if we are presenting, you want to create an inside joke, make some jokes about the audience or the event that you're at or the location you're in. Now, I'm not saying making fun of your audience, but if you have an audience full of mechanical engineers, I'm sure there's some inside jokes that you can make about mechanical engineers, for example.
What we have here is a telenovela where after a night of unbridled passion between Bill Gates and Malcolm Gladwell, they give birth to their bastard love child, Simon Sinek.
So you see what he's doing? He's poking fun at the TED community, just how you can poke fun at whatever community you're speaking in front of. But here's the thing. This is a risky thing, and we don't all necessarily need to do it or should do it.
Beware.
Here's the line that you should have, okay? If you even have the slightest worry that someone might take it poorly, best to stay away from it. If you can say a joke about everyone in the audience and you're 99% sure that it's going to work, and that 1% is really sticking with you, don't do it. If the 1% is like, oh, no, I don't think that's a big deal, go for it, okay? Fortune favors the bold. Remember, we're not saying must do, it's just something we can try. And it's working for Professor Galloway.
Okay, I start us with a question.
Here's where he starts his speech, and this is what I love. Okay, first watch it.
Okay, I start us with a question. Do we love our children?
We love children.
Now, do we love our children? It's great because it's a question. The other reason it works, however, is because it doesn't seem directly related to the topic, or you're trying to figure out how is do we love our children related to how the US is ruining the future for our children. There's some connection there, but we're not exactly sure what it is. Beautiful. You're starting off with curiosity. That's a question that seems a little disconnected.
Sounds like an illegitimate question, right? Well, I'm going to try and convince you otherwise. Essentially, as we go down...
Now, in this slide, here's what I would do. I love America's War on the Young. What a provocative thing to say. But realize something. You, dear viewer, hey, you, hey, come here for a minute. You didn't read any other part of that slide. You looked at the picture, you saw the title, but that writing is so small, you didn't really pay attention to it. That's one of the few things in this presentation that I would tweak. You know what I mean? I would actually take this slide, each generation of age 25 adjusted for inflation. This part is fine. It doesn't really add anything. This I would just make bigger. But watch what he does as a reveal. Here's a strategy that saves this slide.
Generations, we're seeing that for the last two...
Boom. You see what he's doing? He's revealing information as he goes.
generations, people are making less money on an inflation-adjusted basis. In addition, the cost of buying a home, the cost of pursuing education continues to skyrocket. So the purchasing power, the prosperity is inversely correlated to age. Simply put, as we get younger, we're taking away opportunity and prosperity from our youngest.
Simply put, we're taking away prosperity from our youngest. This is another thing that Scott Galloway does, and he does it several times, is after a slide with a lot of technical information, he gives you a summary of what that slide says in one sentence.
The social contract that is now no longer in place, and for the first time in the US's history, a 30-year-old is no longer doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. This is a breakdown in the fundamental agreement we have with any society, and it creates rage and shame.
Now notice, at this point, his language has gone from very technical to rage and shame. Not professional, is it? Yet it has an emotional appeal because it tells you something about him, and look how it resonated with the audience because they all applaud.
People over the age of 55 feel pretty good about America, but less than 1 in 5 people under the age of 34 feel very good about America. This creates an incendiary. Righteous movements, cuts to our society end up becoming opportunistic infections because generally speaking, young people have a warranted envy, they're pissed off, and they're angry that they don't enjoy the same spoils and prosperity that were provided to our generation. A decent...
Boom, another summary. He showed you that slide, but he ended it with a key point. People are dissatisfied because they don't have the same things.
Proxy for how much we value youth labor is minimum wage, and we've kept it purposely pretty low. If it had just kept pace with productivity, it'd be about $23 a share, but we've decided to purposely keep it low. Out of reach, median home price has skyrocketed relative to median household income. As a result, pre-pandemic, the average mortgage payment was $1,100. It's now $2,300 because of an acceleration in interest rates and the fact that the average home has gone from $290,000 to $420,000. By the way, the most expensive homes in the world, based on this metric, are number 3, Vancouver. Why? Because 60% of the cost of building a home goes to permits. Because guess what? The incumbents that own assets have weaponized government to make it very difficult for new entrants to ever get their own assets, thereby elevating their own net worth. This is the transfer I'm going to be speaking about.
Now notice, again, this is the transfer I'm going to be speaking about. He just gave you a bunch of information. Then he told you what that information is leading towards. He summarized it, and then he teased the next part. This is what I'm going to be speaking about.
This has resulted in an enormous transfer of wealth, where people over the age of 70 used to control 19% of household income versus people under the age of 40 used to control 12. Their wealth has been cut in half. This isn't by accident.
Boom. Notice there's so many numbers in this, like, and stuff. And if you would just said the numbers, it wouldn't have done anything. But when he said their wealth has been cut in half, he's always giving you these little summary points that make the slide, which, let's be honest, none of you are ever going to look at all of this stuff, right? In fact, I was trying to pay attention, but I'm listening to him. So it's hard to do these two things. But by giving you the point of the slide, you don't have to read anything else.
It's purposeful. This is me at UCLA in 1987.
Now, what I love about this is now, think about what's happened. So far, he's giving you a lot of factual information and some really heavy subject matter. Now, he's giving you an example. One of the things I always say, remember, anecdotes, examples are not evidence, but they are more convincing than evidence. So let's watch how Scott does this. Professor Galloway.
I know your first thought is I haven't changed a bit. This is also Mia Silverio, who is the analyst who put together these slides. By the way, Mia is 26. I did the math. Just by virtue of her being in this audience, it brings the average age of the entire conference down 11 days.
Another little jab at Ted.
When I applied to UCLA, the admissions rate was 76%. Today, it's 9%. I received a 2.23 GPA from UCLA. I learned nothing but how to make bongs out of household items in every line from Planet of the Apes. And the greatest public school in the world, Berkeley, decided to let me in with a 2.27 GPA. And that's what higher ed is about. Higher ed is about taking unremarkable kids and giving them a shot at being remarkable.
Boom. Another awesome little talking point. And notice something. Throughout his presentation, he's giving you little billboards. You know, when I say summary statements, think about them as little billboards. 5 or 6 words that have so much impact, create an emotional response, but anchor you to a specific idea.
And every year, it's gotten more expensive. Higher ed and homes, and the ability, not only is higher ed incredibly expensive, it's not accessible. Because me and my colleagues are drunk on luxury, and I'll come back to that.
Pretty woman, give your smile to me.
Me and my colleagues are drunk on luxury. Notice another really good little billboard.
Embrace the ultimate strategy. Me and my colleagues in higher ed wake up every morning and ask ourselves the same question when we look in the mirror.
By the way, what a great little tool that we can use. Saying something like, every morning we wake up, we ask ourselves the same question. Every engineer asks themselves the same question. Every person in finance knows this question. Every person who works in blank asks themselves this question. That's a great little phrase we can do to create engagement, because every single dancer I know always asks themselves this question before they dance with someone. You see, this creates more curiosity. So we got billboards, we got curiosity, we have factual information, right? And it always ends with a little billboard. And then we have little moments of personal emotion.
How can I increase my compensation while reducing my accountability? And
another billboard. How can I increase my compensation while reducing my accountability? Right? It summarized everything. There's some fun to it.
We have found the ultimate.
He got humor, even though he is dead serious.
Strategy. It's called an LVMH strategy, where we artificially constrain supply to create aspiration and scarcity such that we can raise tuition faster than inflation. And old people and wealthy people have done the same thing with housing. All of a sudden, once you own a home, you become very concerned with traffic, and you make sure that there's no new housing permits. And here is a memo to my colleagues in higher ed. We're public servants, not fucking Chanel bags.
I mean, you can tell that he's getting very emotionally vested, right? And this is not always something that we can do. But one thing that he does do here that we can all copy is giving a personal point of view. We don't have to drop an F-bomb, but we can give a personal point of view, especially after lots of factual information. Giving your opinion on that factual information is what's going to make that information more interesting, more impactful, and more memorable.
Harvard is the best example of this. They've increased their endowment in the last 40 years and have decided to expand their enrollment, their freshman class, by 4%. Any university that doesn't grow their freshman class faster than population, that has over $1 billion in endowment, should lose their tax-free status because they're no longer in higher education. They're a hedge fund offering classes.
Another billboard, another summary that gives that information emotional appeal.
We need emotional content.
My only real critique, the only reason I didn't call this the perfect presentation, the perfect speech, is because Scott Galloway, honestly, he doesn't need his deck, right? He's so good on his own. But there's too much going on in each slide. Like, let's be honest, even right now, and you know, I keep bringing this up, none of you are reading this slide. You might stare at it. You see, I know you because it's what I do. Not a person watching this video has ever read a slide deck during a presentation. At most, you've tried and had to ignore the speaker. But if the speaker is any good, you're not going to read the deck. It's too hard because you're listening to them. So Professor Scott Galloway, in my humble opinion, something to consider, simplifying your slides, breaking up those numbers, especially because you don't need them. You're only really talking about one number in the deck anyway, right? Rarely are you bringing up all the things on the slide.
Biden should take some of that $750 billion earmark to bail out the 1/3 of people that got to go to college on the backs of the 2/3 that didn't, and give $1 billion to our 500 greatest public institutions, size adjusted, in exchange for three things. One, they use technology and scale to reduce tuition by 2% a year, expand enrollments by 6% a year, and increase the number of vocational certifications.
I'm just going to pause here real quick because what I want us to do, here's a really good example. He talked about all this, but I didn't realize it because there's so much going on. What if he took this slide, guys? Think about this. What if we took this slide and took off all the non-bold stuff? So it just says top third, 1 billion, 10 years. Then in exchange, 2%, 6%, 20%. That's it. Just those numbers. And then Scott, I mean, you do such a good job of saying this stuff, dude. Like, you don't need it. And no one's going to read that deck afterward anyway. They're just going to think about the things you say. So make your slides as impactful as you.
By 20%. Where does that get us? In just 10 years, that doubles the freshman seats and cuts the cost in half. This isn't radical. This is called college in the 80s and 90s. Another transfer of wealth. Look at what's happened to wages. Oh, they've gone up, not as much as corporate profits. There's a healthy tension between capital and labor. For the last 40 years, capital has been kicking the shit out of labor. Well, you think, whoa, what about wages, right? They've gone up. Well, if you compare them to the...
I like that when he transitioned with this slide, and this is another thing that we can use, is when he transitioned, he said, well, what about this? He transitioned with a question. You could actually have done more of that, Professor Galloway, and transitioned with questions.
They barely register. It's been an amazing time to own assets, but your attempt to get the certification or the income such that you can acquire assets has gotten harder and harder. In my class of 300 kids, it's never been easier to be a billionaire. It's never been harder to be a millionaire. By the way,
boom. I would have loved if you paused there. LOVE. If you would have paused after that badass billboard you just gave the room. Listen to it again, my people. Listen to it again. Okay? Like, tell me how badass this is. Imagine if you would have let that sit for just like a second.
It's never been easier to be a billionaire. It's never been harder to be a millionaire. Up 1% of people who are freakishly remarkable or have rich parents and turn them into a superclass of billionaires is to give the bottom 90 a chance to be in the top 10. You know?
So one other tactic that he's using very well is the way he's using numbers. And if you've ever taken any courses with me, I always talk about the rules of numbers. We're not going to remember all the numbers. We're going to remember the ideas behind the numbers. How do you make a number have an idea? Well, you compare it with other numbers. So when he said, the goal of higher education is not to get that 10%, it's to make it easier for the 90%. That comparison is very impactful. See, right now, I don't fully remember what he said. You don't fully remember what he said, but we remember the idea of what he said. And if someone asks, it'd be like, oh, it's something like, instead of making it for the top 10% for super billionaires, it's like making it for like the 90% so they can try and get to be billionaires. That's how we'll remember that, because the idea was embedded by comparing the numbers. Go get it, Scotty.
You know who doesn't need me or higher education? The top 10%. The
Yeah.
whole point of higher ed is to give the unremarkables, i.e. yours truly, who was raised by a single immigrant mother, a shot of being remarkable.
Moment of emotional vulnerability. He paused after that too, and I think it's because he got a little emotional.